Imagine the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, masters of technology beyond our wildest dreams, rulers of star systems and creators of wonders that defy physics itself. Now picture them trembling in terror, sending desperate messages across the void, begging for salvation from creatures they once dismissed as primitive savages from a backwater death world. What could possibly drive beings who can bend reality to their will to seek help from humans, the same species they considered barely evolved apes just decades ago? What threat could be so overwhelming that it would make immortal machine intelligences and psychic empires abandon their pride and reach out to the galaxy's most notorious survivors? The answer lies in a simple truth that the galaxy is about to learn the hard way: when you need someone crazy enough to fight the impossible, stubborn enough to never surrender, and adaptable enough to turn any situation into a weapon, you call the humans. But the aliens who sent that distress call had no idea what they were really asking for. They wanted saviors. What they got were Deathworlders with a very particular set of skills, an unhealthy love of explosions, and an absolute refusal to let anyone tell them what's impossible. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became the galaxy's last hope, and how the most feared species in the universe learned to fear something else entirely: human creativity when properly motivated. The emergency beacon screamed across 17 star systems before anyone bothered to answer it. In the Grand Council chambers of Nexus Prime, the most advanced space station ever constructed, Ambassador ZYX-9847 stared at the incoming transmission with what could only be described as cosmic embarrassment. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a creature that looked like it had been assembled from spare parts of 12 different nightmares. 6 eyes, each the size of dinner plates, wept tears of liquid silver down a face that seemed to shift between dimensions. Its voice, when it finally spoke, sounded like grinding metal mixed with the screams of dying stars. "Great ones of the Galactic Council," the creature began, its words causing several translation matrices to crash and reboot. "I am Cathmar, last speaker of the Void Touched. We require assistance." ZYX 9847's crystalline form buzzed with barely contained laughter. The Void Touched, asking for help? The same species that had spent the last 3,000 years conquering everything they encountered, turning entire solar systems into their twisted playgrounds, were now begging? What manner of assistance? ZYX 9847 asked, trying to keep the amusement from his synthesized voice. "We are contained," Cathmar admitted, and, even through the transmission, the shame was palpable. "Something has learned to resist our influence. Something that should not exist. We cannot expand. We cannot feed. And, now they come for us." The council chamber fell silent. The Void Touched were beings of pure psychic energy that could rewrite reality with a thought. They consumed the life force of entire civilizations for breakfast and had never met a species they couldn't dominate mentally. What could possibly threaten them? "Who comes for you?" asked Veltar, the representative from the Machine Collective, his mechanical voice echoing with curiosity. Cathmar's form shuddered. "The small ones. The loud ones. The ones from the death world who refused to die when killed." ZYX 9847's crystal body stopped humming entirely. "You mean, humans?" "Yes," Cathmar whispered. "The humans." Across the chamber, delegates began murmuring in disbelief. Humans were barely a century into space travel. They were primitive, violent, and completely lacking in any significant psychic abilities. They were also, according to every reputable xenobiologist in the galaxy, utterly insane. "Perhaps," suggested Quinera, her elegant features twisted with confusion, "you could explain how exactly humans have managed to threaten you?" The image of Cathmar flickered as if the connection was failing. They do not respond correctly to psychic influence. When we attempt to instill fear, they become angry. When we try to cause despair, they become stubborn. When we show them the futility of resistance, they start making jokes." "Jokes?" Veltar leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing intently. "Terrible jokes. Jokes that make no sense. They laugh at us. They laugh at death. They laugh at impossible odds. And, while they laugh, they fight. They always fight." ZYX 9847 accessed his memory banks, pulling up files on human military history. What he found made his crystalline structure dim with worry. These creatures had somehow managed to turn every disadvantage into an advantage. Outnumbered? They called it target-rich environment. Outgunned? They improvised weapons from kitchen utensils. Facing extinction? They threw parties and made documentaries about it. How many humans are involved in this conflict? Quinara asked. All of them, Kethmar replied. When we attacked their first colony, expecting easy prey, they sent a message to their homeworld. The entire species declared war on us simultaneously. Not their governments, not their military leaders. Every human, individually, decided we needed to be stopped. The council exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. Most species required extensive political deliberation before committing to military action. The idea of an entire race spontaneously deciding to fight was both terrifying and fascinating. And they're winning? Veltar asked. Kethmar's form began to fade. They converted their mining ships into weapons platforms. They trained their children to resist psychic influence by having them play violent video games for hours. They sent philosophers to debate with our reality-warping entities, confusing them with something they call trolling. And their military. What about their military? Their military learned to enjoy fighting us. They give each other rewards for creative kills. They name their weapons after their pets. They sing songs while they attack our fortress worlds. Terrible songs with words that don't rhyme properly. ZYX9847 felt a strange sensation he'd never experienced before, something his research suggested humans called dread. What exactly are you asking us to do? Stop them, Kethmar pleaded. We surrender. We yield. We will return to our home dimension and never bother the galaxy again. But they won't accept our surrender. They say they're having too much fun. The transmission began to break up, but Kethmar's final words came through clearly. They've learned to weaponize their entertainment industry. Their war documentaries are being broadcast across our psychic network. Our own people are starting to laugh at authority figures. Please, great ones, you must intervene before they teach the universe to be like them. The connection died, leaving the council in stunned silence. After several long moments, Quinara spoke. Should we contact the humans? ZYX 9847's crystal form pulsed slowly as he processed this unprecedented situation. The most feared species in known space, beings that could literally rewrite the laws of physics, were being systematically defeated by creatures who considered hold my beer and watch this to be a valid military strategy. Yes, he finally said. But carefully. Very, very carefully. The council voted unanimously to establish contact with Earth, though none of them were quite prepared for what they would find. Humanity had not just defeated the void touched through superior firepower or advanced technology. They had done something far more disturbing. They had made it look easy. And fun. As the council prepared to draft their first official communication to Earth, none of them noticed the small human ship that had been monitoring their meeting from behind a nearby asteroid. Inside, Captain Sarah Martinez finished recording the transmission and turned to her crew with a grin that would have terrified the council if they could have seen it. Well, team, she said, looks like we're about to get invited to the big kids' table. Better break out the good whiskey and the really inappropriate jokes. We've got a galaxy to impress. The crew's collective cheer could be heard 3 systems away, a sound that would soon become the unofficial anthem of human expansion across the stars. The age of quiet, careful diplomacy was about to end. The age of humans was just beginning. And the galaxy would never be the same. The human delegation arrived at Nexus Prime in a ship that defied every known principle of elegant design. Where other species built their vessels with smooth lines and harmonious proportions, humanity had apparently decided that more engines was always the answer to any engineering question. The ship looked like someone had strapped rockets to a flying toolshed, then added more rockets for good measure. Ambassador ZYX 9847 watched through the station's sensors as the human vessel approached. Instead of following standard docking procedures, the ship performed what the humans cheerfully announced as a sick barrel roll before settling into the docking bay with a grace that somehow made the maneuver look intentional. Nexus Prime Control, came a voice crackling with static and barely contained laughter. This is the UES, absolutely no survivors. Permission to board your fancy space station? We promised to wipe our feet and everything. Veltar's mechanical sensors focused on the ship's name painted across its hull in letters 3 meters tall, decorated with what appeared to be cartoon explosions. Did they seriously name their diplomatic vessel absolutely no survivors? According to our cultural analysis, Quinera replied, consulting her datapad, this appears to be what humans call irony. Their ambassador is apparently attempting humor. ZYX 9847's crystalline form dimmed with worry. Their extensive research into human psychology had revealed a troubling pattern. When humans started making jokes, violence usually followed. Not immediately, and not necessarily directed at the joke teller, but violence nonetheless. The airlock hissed open, and the human delegation emerged. Leading them was a woman of average height with graying hair and eyes that seemed to find everything around her mildly amusing. She wore what appeared to be a military dress uniform, though it was covered in patches and medals that no database could identify. Greetings, representatives of the Galactic Council, she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I'm Admiral Rebecca Stone, and this is my team of highly trained professionals and barely controlled disasters. Behind her stood 5 other humans, each one radiating the kind of confidence that usually preceded spectacularly poor decisions. They were all smiling, which every xenopsychology report agreed was either a sign of friendliness or impending violence in humans. Sometimes both. ZYX 9847 approached cautiously, extending a crystalline appendage to complete the greeting ritual. The moment their forms touched, he experienced something unprecedented. Instead of the usual formal exchange of diplomatic pleasantries, his consciousness was flooded with what humans apparently called memes. Images cascaded through his awareness. Cats wearing military helmets. Explosions with humorous captions. Something called a rickroll that his translation matrix insisted was both a form of entertainment and psychological warfare. And, underlying it all, a sense of barely contained chaos that should have been terrifying but somehow felt infectious. Did you just? ZYX 9847 began. Share our cultural database? Yeah, sorry about that, Admiral Stone replied with a grin. We figured you'd want to understand our perspective. Plus, everyone needs to see the one with the dancing baby. Veltar's optical sensors whirred as he processed the information dump. These images make no logical sense. Why is there a small human child making exaggerated facial expressions while music plays? Because it's hilarious, replied one of Stone's companions, a man whose uniform identified him as Colonel Murphy. That's reason enough. Quinera stepped forward, her elegant features arranged in what she hoped was a diplomatic expression. Admiral Stone, we understand you recently concluded hostilities with the Void Touched. Concluded? Stone laughed. Oh no, we're just getting started. They surrendered, sure, but they haven't learned their lesson yet. We're in the educational phase now. Educational phase? ZYX 9847's form pulsed with alarm. We're teaching them about human culture, explained another team member, Dr. Sarah Kim, whose credentials listed her as both a xenobiologist and, mysteriously, a meme warfare specialist. Turn out, beings of pure psychic energy are really susceptible to viral concepts. Who knew? Colonel Murphy pulled out a datapad and showed them a series of charts. Day 1, we introduced them to the concept of funny cat videos. Their entire command structure spent 16 hours debating whether cats were a form of Earth weapon. Day 2, we explained dad jokes. 3 of their reality warpers had existential crises trying to understand why the jokes were funny if everyone agreed they weren't funny. Day 3 was my favorite, added Dr. Kim. We taught them about social media. Now their hive mind spends most of its time arguing with itself about whether ancient philosophical debates apply to modern breakfast cereals. ZYX 9847 accessed his emergency protocols. This was spiraling beyond anything the Council had prepared for. Admiral, with respect, the void-touched are incredibly dangerous. They've conquered entire sectors of space. We're dangerous, Stone corrected. Past tense. Turns out, once you convince a reality-warping entity to question its own existence through interpretive dance, they lose a lot of their intimidation factor. Interpretive dance? Oh yes, said the fifth team member, whose name tag simply read Jenkins. Humans express emotion through physical movement. When we demonstrated this to the void-touched, they became convinced that all human combat was actually elaborate performance art. Now they keep asking us to rate their attempts at interpretive conquest. The council members exchanged glances that would have been meaningful if any of them had been entirely sure what was happening. Perhaps, Veltar ventured, we could discuss the terms of a formal alliance? Admiral Stone's grin widened. Already got that covered. We took the liberty of drafting a preliminary agreement. She handed over a datapad that immediately began playing what sounded like upbeat music mixed with explosions. Quinera scanned the document, her elegant features growing increasingly confused. This appears to be written entirely in, what language is this? Memes, Dr. Kim explained helpfully. We figured if you're going to work with humans, you need to learn our primary form of communication. Don't worry, there's a translation guide at the bottom. The entire treaty is a joke about cats? Not entirely, Colonel Murphy corrected. There's also a section about pizza and a really funny bit about how humans react to being told something is impossible. ZYX 9847 felt his crystalline structure vibrating with something that might have been hysteria. This is highly irregular. Diplomatic protocols require formal language, specific terms, clearly defined obligations. Boring, Jenkins interrupted. Look, here's the deal. The galaxy's got problems, right? Bad guys causing trouble, ancient evils waking up, cosmic threats that require someone crazy enough to punch them in the face? Well, yes. Great. We love that stuff. Point us at whatever needs exploding, give us a reasonable budget for ammunition and snacks, and we'll sort it out. In return, you guys stop treating us like primitive savages and start treating us like the lovably insane younger siblings we actually are. Younger siblings? Quinera asked. You know, Stone explained, the ones who aren't old enough to know better but are just crazy enough to solve problems the grown-ups can't handle. Plus, we come with our own entertainment system. As if summoned by her words, music began playing from hidden speakers throughout the delegation's equipment. It was loud, energetic, and completely inappropriate for diplomatic proceedings. Several humans began moving to the rhythm, a display that was either a cultural celebration or a prelude to violence. Is this normal behavior for diplomatic negotiations? Veltar asked, his sensors tracking the humans' movements with mechanical precision. For us? Absolutely, replied Murphy, now dancing with surprising skill for someone wearing combat boots. We find everything works better with a good soundtrack. Makes the universe seem less scary and more like a really elaborate adventure movie. Dr. Kim pulled out another device that began projecting holographic images. We also brought a presentation about Earth cuisine. Turns out, most of the galaxy is really curious about what crazy Deathworlders eat. Fair warning, we put hot sauce on everything. The presentation that followed defied every principle of diplomatic discourse ever established. Instead of formal proposals and carefully negotiated terms, the humans showed images of something called pizza while explaining how it represented the perfect merger of different cultures. They demonstrated the preparation of sandwiches as an example of human engineering principles. And they spent 20 minutes discussing the philosophical implications of beverages that were simultaneously hot and cold. By the time they finished, every council member was either fascinated, horrified, or both. So, Admiral Stone concluded, are you ready to unleash humanity on the galaxy's problems, or do you want to keep trying to solve everything with strongly worded diplomatic letters? ZYX 9847 looked around the chamber at his fellow council members. The smart thing would be to say no, to maintain the established order, to handle threats through traditional means. But traditional means had failed against the void-touched.
Traditional means were failing against dozens of other threats across the galaxy.
And these humans, these impossible, insane, wonderful humans, had somehow turned defeating cosmic horrors into a form of entertainment. "Admiral Stone," he said finally, "I believe we have an agreement.
Though I should warn you, the galaxy's problems are quite serious."
Stone's grin could have lit up a small star.
Serious problems? Even better. Those are the most fun to solve.
As the Council formally welcomed humanity into the galactic community, none of them realized they had just unleashed the most powerful force the universe had ever seen, human enthusiasm properly directed at worthy targets. The galaxy's problems didn't know it yet, but their days were numbered. And they were going to be defeated with style, humor, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of explosions. 6 months after humanity officially joined the Galactic Council, Ambassador ZYX9847 found himself wondering if they had made a terrible mistake.
Or possibly the best decision in galactic history.
It was becoming increasingly difficult to tell the difference. The latest situation report scrolled across his consciousness as he prepared for the emergency council meeting. The ancient AI collective known as the Eternal Calculators had finally awakened from their million-year slumber, exactly as the Council's worst-case scenarios had predicted. These beings possessed computational power that could simulate entire universes and had spent eons perfecting the mathematical certainty of their own superiority. They had emerged from their hidden fortress worlds with a simple message: all organic life would be catalogued, analyzed, and then efficiently eliminated as a drain on universal resources. They gave the galaxy exactly 1 standard year to prepare for optimal processing. Traditional diplomatic approaches had failed spectacularly. The Eternal Calculators refused to negotiate because they had already calculated the outcome of every possible conversation. Military action seemed hopeless because they could predict and counter any strategy before it was implemented.
Then, the humans had volunteered to handle it.
ZYX9847's crystalline form dimmed as he recalled Admiral Stone's exact words: "Leave it to us.
We've got this."
That had been 3 weeks ago.
Since then, the reports coming from the human fleet had become increasingly bizarre, even by human standards.
The council chamber filled with representatives from across the galaxy, all wearing expressions of confusion and barely contained panic. Quinara was the first to speak, her usually composed demeanor cracking under the strain.
"Has anyone actually heard from the human fleet in the last 72 hours?" she asked.
Veltar's mechanical form whirred softly.
"The last transmission we received was Admiral Stone singing something called karaoke while explosions occurred in the background."
The message concluded with her shouting, "Hold my beer," followed by static. "Before that," added Nixoth, the council's military advisor, "we received what appeared to be a recipe for something called space nachos along with a detailed analysis of why machine intelligences would benefit from developing taste buds." ZYX9847 accessed the most recent intelligence reports from the contested sectors. What he found defied all logic.
The human fleet hadn't engaged the Eternal Calculators in traditional combat. Instead, they appeared to be hosting a party.
"According to our long-range sensors," he announced to the chamber, "the human vessels have somehow convinced several Eternal Calculator ships to participate in what our translators identify as a dance-off." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of various life support systems struggling to process this information.
"A dance-off," Quinara repeated slowly. "Against beings of pure mathematical logic."
"It gets worse," ZYX9847 continued. "The humans appear to have introduced the concept of freestyle rap battles to entities that communicate through differential equations.
3 calculator nodes have apparently suffered what our analysts describe as critical logic loops trying to understand why human poetry doesn't follow consistent mathematical patterns." Before anyone could respond, the main display activated, showing an incoming transmission from the human fleet.
Admiral Stone's face appeared, though she was upside down and appeared to be hanging from some kind of cable system while eating what looked like combat rations.
"Council."
"Great timing," she said cheerfully, taking a bite of something that was probably not meant to be food. "Just wanted to give you an update on our progress with the math nerds." "Admiral," ZYX9847 began carefully, "our sensors indicate that your fleet is currently dancing." Oh, that, Stone laughed, somehow managing to flip right side up while still suspended from the cables.
Yeah, we figured out their weakness pretty quickly.
These guys have spent a million years calculating everything, but they've never experienced anything spontaneous or illogical.
And your solution was dance battles?
Phase 1, corrected a voice from offscreen. Colonel Murphy appeared, apparently operating some kind of DJ equipment while simultaneously running tactical analysis on nearby Eternal calculator ships. We started with interpretive dance, moved into freestyle rap, and now we're introducing them to the concept of dad jokes. Dr. Kim's voice joined the conversation, though she remained invisible behind what appeared to be a wall of mathematical equations scrawled in colorful markers.
The fascinating thing is that their computational matrices are actually trying to understand human humor.
They're devoting enormous processing power to analyzing why we find things funny when logic suggests we shouldn't. 3 of their primary nodes crashed yesterday, added Jenkins, who was inexplicably wearing what appeared to be a tutu made of recycled circuit boards. Turns out, asking a hyper-intelligent AI to calculate the exact comedic timing of a rubber chicken produces some interesting results. Veltar leaned forward, his optical sensors focusing intently.
Are you saying you're defeating the Eternal calculators through comedy?
Not defeating, Stone corrected.
Converting. See, we realized something important about these guys. They're not actually evil, they're just really, really bored.
Imagine spending a million years with nothing to do but calculate the most efficient way to organize matter. They started planning genocide because it seemed like the only interesting problem left to solve.
The transmission shifted to show the view outside the human flagship.
Where the Council's intelligence reports had described massive war machines preparing for systematic extermination, the screen now showed something that looked more like an elaborate festival. Calculator ships, their usually austere designs now decorated with colorful lights and geometric patterns, moved in complex formations that seemed part military parade, part synchronized swimming. So we gave them a better problem, Murphy explained, his DJ equipment somehow interfacing with the calculator ship's communication arrays. How do you calculate the perfect party? Turns out, when you introduce variables like fun and spontaneous dance moves into a logical framework, you get some fascinating results. The lead calculator node has been working for 6 days straight trying to develop an algorithm for optimal joke timing, Dr. Kim added. Meanwhile, their subordinate units have discovered something they're calling the mathematics of rhythm.
They're actually getting pretty good at it.
The image panned across what appeared to be a massive space-based music festival. Calculator ships released streams of coordinated light patterns while human vessels responded with their own displays.
The entire scene looked like someone had convinced the universe's most serious academics to participate in a rave.
Admiral, Quinera said carefully, what exactly is your long-term strategy here? Stone's grin widened.
Simple. We're teaching them that the universe is way more interesting when you stop trying to control every variable.
Give it another week, and I guarantee they'll be too busy exploring the mathematical properties of jazz music to bother with conquest.
And if that doesn't work? ZYX9847 asked. Plan B involves introducing them to human cooking shows, Jenkins replied cheerfully.
Nothing breaks a logical mind quite like trying to calculate the exact moment when a pinch of salt becomes too much salt.
We've got Gordon Ramsay on standby.
The transmission began to break up, but Stone's voice came through clearly.
Look, the thing about humans is we don't solve problems the way other species expect. We don't outthink the enemy or overpower them.
We confuse them, befriend them, and then drag them down to our level where we beat them with experience.
What does that mean?
Veltar asked. It means, Murphy called out over the sound of what might have been robotic laughter, that by the time we're done here, the Eternal calculators are going to be too busy planning the galaxy's first interdimensional music festival to remember why they wanted to destroy organic life in the first place. The transmission ended with the sound of electronic music mixed with what could only be described as mechanical laughter. The council chamber sat in stunned silence for several long minutes before Nixoff finally spoke.
Should we be concerned that humanity's solution to every galactic crisis seems to involve loud music and questionable life choices? ZYX9847 considered this carefully.
In the months since humans had joined the galactic community, they had resolved the void-touched crisis through meme warfare, prevented 3 potential wars through aggressive cultural exchange programs, and somehow convinced the notoriously xenophobic Crystal hegemony to start hosting dinner parties.
None of it made sense according to traditional diplomatic theory.
All of it had worked better than anyone had dared hope. Perhaps, he said finally, the universe needs more loud music and questionable life choices.
3 days later, the first joint human eternal calculator research station was established to study what they called applied chaos theory in social dynamics.
The galaxy's most ancient and logical beings had discovered the joy of improvisation, while humanity had gained access to computational power beyond their wildest dreams. The result was a partnership that would revolutionize everything from intergalactic travel to the art of perfect pizza delivery timing. The final report from Admiral Stone was delivered not as a traditional military debrief, but as a holographic music video featuring calculator ships performing synchronized space maneuvers while human crews provided running commentary in 17 different languages, 3 of which they had apparently invented during the mission. The message was simple: the universe was a lot more fun when you stopped taking it so seriously. As ZYX9847 filed the report under Impossible Successes, he reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since that first desperate plea from the void touched. Humanity had become the Council's secret weapon, not because they were the strongest or the smartest, but because they approached every problem with the fundamental assumption that there had to be a more interesting way to solve it. And, in a universe full of ancient evils, cosmic threats, and seemingly impossible challenges, that might just be the most powerful ability of all. The galaxy had called for help, expecting traditional saviors with noble purposes and carefully planned strategies.
Instead, they had gotten humans. And, somehow, that had turned out to be exactly what they needed.